Everybody, it's Johnny Two-Face here, back with another reaction video. And yes, I am recording in daylight. In fact, I'm recording this at pretty much almost 10 to 8 in the morning. So yeah, that's a strange one. I'm recording in daylight. So sorry, little stupid tidbit just to get out of the way. Anyway, now that I'm back with another reaction video, this time I'm reacting to Muslim Conquest of Egypt 640, Battles of Babylon and Heliopolis. Sorry. God, I struggle with that word. And yes, I know I'm probably gonna get absolutely rinsed in the comments for that. But anyway, that's by the by. So again, if you haven't seen my reactions to the other episodes that I've reacted to in this series, I suggest you check them out before checking this one out. And also, bearing in mind, I am watching these in order on the playlist here. So I'm hoping that these are all in. I'm guessing because Kings and Generals are one hell of a history channel here on YouTube, I presume that these are all in the right order. So, and they look to be, judging by the playlist. So, anyway, I've rambled on too long about that. So anyway, the usual disclaimer when I react to anything historical, if I don't show so much what is considered a proper reaction, is probably obvious I don't know much about the subject at hand, and if I do know anything, I'll most likely pause the video to give my input or ask any curious questions, which hopefully will be answered in the comments below. With that being said, the link to the original video will be in the description down below. Please go and subscribe to Kings and Generals, another great history channel here on YouTube. And yeah, and I hope recording in daylight, the shine from the daylight from my window isn't off-putting. Because obviously, usually I record these at night, and someone pointed out in one of my first episodes I reacted to in this series, it looks like I was literally conking out every minute. But bear in mind, because of the camera angle and my monitor is there, I look at the screens there, and sometimes I look down to check other stuff because sometimes my phone goes off without realizing. And also the other problem was I tended to record these very late at night, and I was already tired during the day, so personal reasons. But anyway, I've rambled on way too long, so let's get into the video and see what happens in this video. Oops. That's not too loud.
Egypt was the wealthiest, most productive and coveted land in all the ancient world, and thus the target of many invasions.
Yep.
From the Assyrians to the Achaemenid Persians of Cyrus, followed by Alexander the Great and finally the Romans, Egypt changed hands multiple times, serving as a prestigious jewel in the crown which filled the treasuries of occupying peoples and empires. The Muslim Caliphate was no different in this regard. Welcome to our video covering the Muslim campaign in Byzantine Egypt and the battles of Babylon and Heliopolis. The sponsor of today's video is Lucy, a cleaner, better tasting nicotine alternative on a mission to decrease the harmful effects of tobacco through their new nicotine
I
gum.
don't smoke.
Started by 2 Caltech scientists around you with your smoking. So what are you waiting for? Go to Lucy.co.
Feel free to check them out if you're interested.
Kings and Generals for 20% off your order today. Despite winning all of Syria and Iraq for Islam in a series of stunning victories, the Caliphate's military situation remained unstable. Fierce Persian resistance continued in the mountains to the northeast, while Emperor Heraclius was hindering the Muslim advance as much as he could. To stall for time, while he created an impenetrable dead zone between the Anatolian plain and enemy-occupied Syria, Heraclius sent envoys to his Christian Arab allies in the Jazeera area, requesting that
sorry to pause so early in this, but it just feels like no matter where you come from or what civilization you belong to, I think it's in a way proving my point that no matter how good a leader you are, sometimes having such a big empire, sometimes that's just never enough. And it's just been proven from different leaders, whether it be European, Middle Eastern, Asian, American, it doesn't matter. When you're a leader of a nation, there's just, especially in this era, it just feels like nothing is ever enough until you have it all. And I think it's just a mindset that we all never could fully understand. I don't know why I just said all that, but anyway.
They attack the Muslim army in Syria. They obeyed the emperor's orders, crossing the Euphrates and arriving outside Emesa in March 638, where Abu Ubaidah had concentrated his forces to meet them. However, Umar, in his typical hands-on fashion, reacted to this news by sending orders to Sa'd in Persia for 3 columns to invade Jazeera from Iraq. When this group of Muslim warriors launched their attack and began plundering, the Christian Arabs retreated. In the aftermath, forces under Sa'd turned and annexed Jazeera completely. At the same time, multiple mounted raiding parties were sent by Abu Ubaidah into Roman lands. Khalid, the commander of one of these contingents, captured Marash in autumn 638 and hauled vast quantities of loot back to his base at Kinisrin. However, Khalid wasn't a man accustomed to hoarding wealth, routinely distributing his personal share of battle spoils to others. On one occasion, after his raid on Heraclius' lands, an Arab chief and excellent poet, Ashaz bin Qais, recited a beautiful piece for Khalid, and in return was given 10,000 dirhams. Unknown to the poet.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't dirhams the currency still used in one of the in one of the Middle Eastern countries today? Is dirhams? Is it still the currency? Sorry, just a random curiosity.
Benefactor, this act of generosity was in fact to herald the end of his peerless military career. Caliph Umar had been concerned about Khalid for years by 638, specifically that his personal brilliance and constant victories were enticing the Muslims to worship him rather than God. So when Umar received reports of his general's extravagance, Umar used it as an excuse to dismiss the Sword of Islam from his post and bring him to Medina. When the two formed...
I'm sorry, but that just sounds like I'm probably being Captain Obvious here, but that is, to me, that is such extreme paranoia. Like, it just sounds like Umar never went to understood the reason behind Khalid's generosity. And it just... I'm just trying to think. It reminded me of a quote saying, like, learn to be content with little rather than trying to enrich yourself all the time, or something along those lines. Like, because I think Khalid, from what I'm seeing so far, that he is trying to be a good leader by, sharing most of his wealth, rather than be a coward that hoards all of it and jealously watching from afar and making sure no one else does the same. Now that I think about it, there was probably a better way I could have said all that, but hey. Yeah, I'm still recording this quite early in the morning, so I'll wait for the caffeine to kick in.
Men came face to face. The Caliph spoke the words, "You have done, and no man has done as you have done. But it is not people who do, it is Allah who does." After this, Khalid left Arabia for Chalcis, where he lived just 4 more unhappy, unremarkable years before finally passing away in 642. As the undefeated victor of hundreds of clashes leaves our story, Another bold but historically unappreciated Arab general enters the limelight. That was the 48-year-old Amr ibn al-As, who won distinction during the battles at Ajnadain, Yarmouk, and many others. When Abu Ubaidah appointed the conquered regions to his subordinates, Amr received all of Palestine. Upon moving into the area, he forced the surrender of Gaza and several other Roman garrisons which had remained unconquered after the fall of Jerusalem. In early 639, plague spread rapidly throughout the Levant. The Arabs, unaccustomed to this kind of terrible disease because of their nomadic lifestyle, died in the thousands, including generals Yazid, Shurabil, and Abu Ubaidah himself. It is worth noting that upon Yazid's death, his younger brother Muawiyah was appointed as governor in his place.
Sometimes as societies, we forget that sometimes disease sometimes can kill more than being on the field of battle. Yeah, I think I might have to watch it back, but I remember hearing about this in Epic History's series about Belisarius, because Belisarius was a Roman general under the leadership of Emperor Justinian, who was in charge of the Eastern Roman Empire, which later became the Byzantine Empire. For those who know, for those who don't know.
Amr, who survived, was given command of the army, and this gave him a golden opportunity to propose an idea to the Caliph. Having visited Alexandria multiple times earlier in his life, Amr was well aware of just how prosperous the Nile region was, and believed it would be easy to conquer. The new commander put forward his plan to seize Roman Egypt for Islam, confidently declaring to the Caliph, "It is the richest of lands and the weakest in defending itself." Although Umar, who wished to consolidate Muslim gains after years of incessant warfare and plague, was initially reluctant, believing Amr was underestimating the task, his eloquence and persistence eventually led the Caliph to relent.
I'm sorry if I'm going slightly off topic here, but it just reminds me of a story that I heard about how the Persians conquered Egypt. Basically, a traitor to the Egyptians defected to the Persians and told them a little secret. And this time, when Persia couldn't invade their capital at the time, which is Alexandria, they approached the city this time with cages with cats in them and hung them over the front of them. Some of them didn't even had their weapons tucked away, but just carried these cages with cats in them and held them in front of them as they were advancing towards the sea. Now, ancient Egyptian culture still believed in their old gods. For Egyptian mythology fans, you already know about this. But one of the major figures that, and I think it was a goddess of protection, Bastet, I think it was. And of course, her symbol was the simple house cat. And the defenders, the archers on the wall around Alexandria, were reluctant to let loose their arrows because of the cages that the Persians were carrying that had cats in them, which they didn't want to. They didn't want to risk harming these cats because they would reckon that it will be an insult to Bastet. So the Persians just used their beliefs against them. It's quite an effective tactic. Sorry, a bit of a weird side bit there.
Restricted to just 4,000 troops, mainly cavalry, Amr set forth from Jabia that same night in total secrecy, under the condition that he would withdraw if instructions to turn back reached him before he crossed into Egypt. However, if Amr's army was already inside Egypt when these instructions arrived, it could keep going. Convinced almost immediately that this expedition was too risky, Umar sent a camel rider off to Amr carrying a sealed letter ordering him to pull back. When it reached the general at Rafah, just a few miles from Egypt, Amr understood that the letter would doom his expedition before it even began. So Amr left the message unopened and moved into Egypt,
Wow.
and only then opened the letter. And since the army was already in Egypt when Umar's orders were revealed, Amr reasoned that it could keep going.
Wow.
The timeless province of power and riches was incredibly vulnerable, weakened by years of military laxity, and alienated from the imperial authorities in Constantinople by long-standing cultural and religious differences. The primary factor was that the Copts, Egypt's native population, adhered to a different form of Christianity to the empire at large. Emperor Heraclius in particular persecuted any perceived heretic in a manner that made religious division inevitable.
Yeah.
The Roman authorities in Alexandria were alerted to Amr's presence, responding by raising troops and sending some of them to reinforce Pelusium, the key to Egypt. Setting forth from Arish in late December 639, the Caliphate's small army of veterans soon reached Pelusium, besieging it by land. However, Roman naval superiority meant that the city garrison could be reinforced and supplied, and this led to a 2-month-long siege, which was only brought to a conclusion when the Muslims repulsed a sortie and stormed the city in mid-February 640. After taking Pelusium, to the alarm and astonishment of the government in Alexandria, Amr marched unopposed.
I mean, any military tactic experts out there, I feel free to correct me on this, but I think they shouldn't have sallied out. If they stayed behind the walls, I think they might have had a chance. But again, I'm not an expert on these tactics, so...
along the Nile Delta's eastern fringe until he reached the citadel of Bilbais. The defenders resisted under blockade for a month, giving the Romans time to shift their forces around. Aware that the marauding 4,000 Arabs were aiming for the Memphis area, Egypt's prefect and patriarch of Alexandria, Cyrus, marched a 20,000-strong army to reinforce the nearby fortress called Babylon. Commanded by Augustulus Theodorus and garrisoned by 5,000 soldiers, Babylon was one of the Nile's strongest defensive bastions, standing 60 feet high in places and possessing walls up to 6 feet thick. By the time Amr starved the Bilbais defenders into surrender in the spring of 640, the Romans were prepared for his inevitable assault. Bypassing Heliopolis on their left, the Muslims arrived outside Babylon in May. Due to its sheer size, only some of Theodorus's army were manning the battlements, while most were encamped outside of the northern wall of the fortress, protected by a deep arcing ditch. Fortifying this secondary position even further were spikes in front, and undug sections around the perimeter to act as sally points. Shortly after arriving and witnessing the Roman strength arrayed inside Babylon, Amr launched his 4,000 against the Roman units directly in front of the trench. After a hard-fought skirmish, the Muslims were repulsed with relative ease and set about finally making camp. Observing that his plan to keep Theodorus on the defensive was paying off, Amr mounted daily raids against the Roman positions all along the ditch. Furthermore, in an attempt to conceal just how tiny his forces were, the Muslim commander split and spread it over a large area. This state of affairs lasted for 2 months, the Muslims constantly assailing the Roman positions, and the Romans remaining hunkered down behind the ditch, presumably believing they would be able to win without fighting. By July, no opportunity to gain a decisive victory had shown itself to Amr, and his men were slowly tiring. So, having put the eventuality to the back of his mind, the man who had proclaimed that taking Egypt would be simple wrote to the Caliph asking for reinforcements. Rather than chiding his overly optimistic general, Umar mustered and sent him 4,000 reinforcements to conclude the campaign, who reached Amma a few weeks later. With these new forces, the Muslim attacks on Babylon were renewed with even greater force, killing large numbers of Roman soldiers, but failing to break the bastion's resistance. Even more hesitantly than the first time, Amma sent another request for Umar's aid. This time a further 4,000 troops were dispatched under the leadership of Zubayr bin al-Awwam, who, despite being offered Amma's command by the irritated caliph, merely stated that he wished to help the Muslims engaged in Egypt. These new troops arrived in late September. After conducting a personal reconnaissance mission around the area, Zubayr pointed out something to Amma which the general seems to have missed. Still present about 10 miles behind the Muslim army was the Roman garrisoned city of Heliopolis. If coordinated correctly, these troops could smash into the Muslims from behind if Theodorus launched any attack from Babylon. To remove this potential threat, Amma led a large portion of his 12,000 soldiers to Heliopolis, leaving just enough at the fortress to keep the Romans on their toes. Upon approaching the walls, however, some of the garrison's cavalry contingent emerged from the city and beat some of Amma's horsemen in a brief engagement. Nevertheless, they were forced to pull back inside the walls as the city was besieged. Only a short time after investing Heliopolis, Zubayr and a small unit of hand-picked warriors scaled the walls in a dashing maneuver and breached the city. Seeing this, and realizing that the result of the clash was inevitable anyway, Heliopolis' garrison sued for peace and paid the jizya, after which Amma and Zubayr returned to Babylon. In their absence, the Romans had driven away the Muslim detachments closest to the trench and re-established their positions beyond it. Theodorus, likely realizing that he wasn't going to have the luxury of simply waiting the invaders out, began employing the Muslims' own tactics against them, launching daily raids through the Roman bridgeheads. Although the Romans generally lost more men in these scattered engagements, they could afford to, while Amma could not. The stalemate went on relatively unchanged until a revered Arab officer, Kharija bin Huzafa, approached Amma with a risky but potentially decisive plan to win the battle. That night, Kharija was given a cavalry regiment and ordered to lay his trap, which he did by riding around to the southern spur of a featureless ridge on the eastern side of the field. After quietly taking up a concealed position relatively close to the Romans' ditch, the Muslim cavalry waited. As Huzafa suspected, when morning came, the Roman forces crossed the trench in force and deployed for battle. The Muslims arrayed opposite them. When both sides were ready, Theodorus launched his attack across the front, pushing Amma, who ordered his army to retreat from Babylon with suspicious ease. It was in reality a feigned retreat.
Tactical retreat.
When the melee had moved far beyond Babylon's defensive trench, Kharija's mounted contingent galloped out from their hiding place behind the ridge and occupied the crossing areas which Theodorus would have to use for any retreat. Amma, seeing that his horsemen were in place, countercharged with immense ferocity, driving the Romans back towards their own fortifications. Hearing the given signal, Kharija also launched his assault, crashing straight into Theodorus' rear, hemming the Romans in and then encircling them. Many defenders were killed, but a few Roman units turned and burst through Huzafa's cavalry, managing to re-secure the crossing points. The remnants of the Roman army at Babylon retreated across the trench, pursued closely by Amma's forces, who continued their attack up to the very walls of the fortress. Fighting continued in the space between the ditch and the citadel proper, until the gate was closed from inside. Those who got in were the lucky ones, as not a single Roman soldier remained alive on the field of battle. The morale of Cyrus, who was not a military man by profession, and the Roman soldiery as a whole, was completely shaken by this stark defeat, and to the prefect, it was clear that peace had to be concluded. To make matters even more dire, Amr somehow got his hands on a few catapults and used them to launch deadly boulders, softening up the defenses. When this began happening, Cyrus departed Babylon with a small escort and took up residence on the mid-river island of Rauda, from which the fortress was being resupplied. Then the Coptic prefect dejectedly sent word to the Muslims that he wished to treat with them. Envoys were exchanged back and forth between the two sides, and Heraclius' viceroy attempted to offer Amr a lavish bribe if the Muslims left Egypt, but the Arab commander responded by giving 3 options: conversion to Islam, payment of the jizya, or death. Cyrus favored capitulating in some form, but his Egyptian colleagues wouldn't have any of it, so the stalemate continued outside the impenetrable fortress. Since coming to terms with Cyrus was impossible, Amr went into Babylon with a few companions in order to speak with Theodorus. However, when he was entering the fortress, a Roman soldier muttered to him scornfully, "You have entered, now see how you get out." Correctly believing orders had been given for him to be killed upon exiting the conference, Amr tricked his way out of the fortress, convincing Theodorus that he was going to bring even more of his generals unwittingly into the trap. These attempts at ending the siege failed, and the gridlock outside Babylon continued. But finally, in mid-December, the observant Zubayr noticed that since most of the fighting had taken place on Babylon's north side, the riverside Gate of Iron and its 2 guard towers were relatively undefended. Just like that, the Muslims had found a key to Theodorus' citadel. Swiftly putting his infiltration plan into action with Amr's blessing, Zubayr assembled a unit to conduct the operation. On the moonless, clear night of December 20th, 640, most of the Muslim army arrayed quietly outside the Gate of Iron, while Zubayr and his comrades climbed ladders up the wall. Then, when some of his men were gathered on top, a deafening Islamic battle cry was sounded, echoed by the entire army, causing shock and panic amongst defenders who had no idea what was happening. Amidst the chaos, Zubayr slew the gatehouse sentries and broke the chain which held the gate closed, allowing Amr and the Muslim army to flood inside. While some of the more elite Roman formations made a brave last stand, most of their comrades routed towards the Nile. Once they reached the riverbank, the soldiers crossed to the safety of Rauda on pre-prepared boats, which ferried soldiers back and forth throughout the night. Among those who fled was Theodorus, who managed to escape Amr's grasp and run back to Alexandria. The next day, Cyrus sued for and obtained peace for the Copts on Muslim terms, agreeing to pay the jizya and submit the entire country to Islamic rule. The Romans in Egypt could either accept and remain, or reject and depart. Unsurprisingly, when Heraclius received a letter from Cyrus seeking the imperial stamp of approval for his peace with Amr, the emperor was furious and categorically refused, responding with a message full of scorn and insults. To ensure that an active defense of Egypt continued despite the prefect's treachery, Heraclius had other messages ordering firm resistance delivered to all of his Roman generals in Egypt, who obeyed their sovereign without question. Cyrus, disavowed by the Romans, put himself and the Copts under Amr's command, promising the Muslims administrative and engineering assistance. Memphis was now secure, and the push towards Alexandria could begin. Our series on the early Muslim expansion will continue soon, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely.
And that'll do it. This has been another good episode from Kings and Generals about the early Muslim expansion. So if you like this reaction, please like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.